What kind of things should someone look out for if they might have diabetes?
If they do have some numbness and tingling, or they've got some redness, some swelling, perhaps the circulatory system isn't doing exactly what it should be. Perhaps the nervous system isn't doing exactly what it should be, and something's got to be causing that. Could well be diabetes.
If you have been diagnosed with diabetes, what are some things that they can A, look out for, and then B, implement in their daily lives?
Two of the best things that you can actually do is
1 in 20 people having been diagnosed, that's just that have been diagnosed. How many more people are living with diabetes that aren't aware, that aren't taking care of themselves, that aren't doing those preventative measures?
potentially.
Welcome to the Comfort Walk and Talk, where every step towards comfort is a step towards a healthier you.
We're your hosts, Ash,
Jeff.
And Ben.
Together, let's walk the talk, transforming your lives from the ground up.
Hi everyone, welcome back to Comfort Walk and Talk. Today we have a very special guest back. Everybody loved her in a few episodes back, and she's back again today. We have Sophie. How are you, Sophie?
I'm great. Thanks, Ash. Thanks for having me back again.
Yeah, no worries. So we have, obviously your experience as a podiatrist is huge, and today we're going to be talking specifically about diabetes, and in particular, diabetes and foot care and why it's so important. So I guess first up, what's the connection between diabetes and foot care?
Okay. Well, I would start by saying there's effectively two main systems that are involved when we talk about diabetes. So we talk about the vascular or circulatory system, and then we talk about our neurological system or our nervous system. And so when we see diabetics come through to a podiatry clinic, often they start, or their first thing that they're going to come into the clinic for is they're noticing some changes and so forth down at the level of the feet. The further we are away from the heart, the further and the harder it is for those systems to work. And so when diabetic patients come through to a podiatry clinic, often they start by complaining of something at the level of the feet. So, for example, they might have some numbness and tingling associated with their nervous system that they're going to notice first in the most distal part of their body, so typically the toes, the feet, lower leg and so forth. And the same thing with our circulatory system. So we might start to notice things like some swelling, some redness, slower healing if they've got a wound or something like that. And that tends to start down at the furthest part away from the body.
And how common is that? How many people would you generally see?
Diabetes is incredibly common. So in fact, 1 in 20 Australians are diabetic, are affected by diabetes.
You see a lot in movies and TV, someone with diabetes, bigger person, they end up getting their feet cut off. Yeah. What's happened there? What's the connection?
Well, it actually comes right back to exactly what I was talking about before with your circulatory on your nervous system. If we lose some sensation at the level of the feet, if we've got poorer, delayed or compromised healing down there at the level of the foot, then it starts at the bottom and it works its way back to us progressively or more proximally. So oftentimes someone might start with a small infection just on the toe. They might start with a cut or something like that on the bottom of their foot. And if they aren't looking after themselves properly, if their diabetes hasn't been managed well, then that can just compound and compound. Before we know it, we've got an ulcer, and then we've got some gangrene, and then we've got all sorts of things. One leads to the next, and before you know it, you're losing parts of the foot.
It escalates.
And that's because it's affected the nervous system. They can't feel their feet anymore.
Yeah, 100%.
And that the blood flow for healing the feet isn't quite as much as well, isn't it?
That's correct. So that's quite compromised. And then often those people don't notice. They could have been walking around with, actually, I'll tell you, one time I do recall seeing a patient many, many years ago, and he had a bottle top in the bottom of his foot. He'd probably been walking around with in the bottom of his foot for probably a month or more, but obviously his neurological system was quite compromised, and he just had no ability to feel that. That's why it's so important that those diabetic patients get to their podiatrist, have a really good relationship, and keep an eye on what's happening down there.
So there's a bottle top in his shoe, or it's like grown into his foot?
No, it was stuck in the bottom of his foot. So it had actually then caused like a wound at the site. Some of the skin sort of healing that we won't get into too many details, but not a very nice site there, and just inability to feel that. So no idea that was even there.
Right, so those kind of those foot injuries, how would a person with diabetes prevent that?
The best thing they can do is use their eyes and really like rely on their visuals to just be checking and being really diligent looking at the bottom of their feet. Because even though you can't feel something, hopefully we can see it. So, you know, sometimes if you don't have that flexibility to get underneath your feet, bring your foot up to you, then, you know, a partner, a child, or whoever at home, someone that's caring for them to look under their feet as well and check that there's no, you know, a small splinter, a small cut, because all those things can compound very, very quickly or escalate quickly.
And obviously that's a very extreme case.
It is.
Hopefully it's an extreme case.
Check your feet, guys.
What about for people that are not that far advanced in their diabetes?
Yeah.
How can they prevent it? What are some daily things that if you have been diagnosed with diabetes and you know that this could potentially be a problem for you, what are some things that they can A, look out for, and then B, implement in their daily lives?
Yeah, definitely. Well, two of the best things that you can do to prevent, hopefully, or manage those early for those early diabetic patients is actually diet and exercise. Yep. So we're looking at keeping our blood sugar levels down. So if that means reducing some of the naughty, sugary things in our diet, perhaps even some of the really carb-heavy things in our diet, because we're trying to get those blood sugar levels under control. And then, of course, exercise as well, because what we want to do is we want to maintain a really healthy circulatory system so that we're not going to have any issues, you know, with compromised healing and those sorts of things down the track.
And that would be things like walking, I'm assuming, is very important to keep that circulation going.
100%. Yep. So walking and just moving. So it doesn't have to be running, you know, 10Ks on a treadmill, but just being up and being active and being, moving every day.
And what about for like the demographic of people that you find these problems with, you know, for someone that might go see you in a clinic, what age bracket are we looking at here? You know, is it more like someone in their 40s or is it more, you know, as you get older?
The prevalence actually increases as we get older. It's also more prevalent in males than females. So we tend to see a lot of over 65s. But then again, we do see a bit of a spike again in over 75s. So just an increase with age, unfortunately.
And how does that affect how they live? You know, in some of those, obviously that extreme case you gave earlier, that's rough. But, you know, so for potentially someone that is seeing you in a clinic and they are on top of it, they're managing it, how does it impact?
It probably means that person has to become a little bit more reliant or dependent on their GP, their family and friends, and a podiatrist. So they have to kind of establish really good relationships with those people so that they can go and make sure that they're maintaining optimal foot care. So are they speaking to their podiatrist about, what are the best shoe choices? What can I do to prevent any cracks and cuts in my feet? And then speaking to the doctor about managing, whether it's dietary management or with medications such as your insulin, managing those blood sugar levels. So it does take a little bit of a village sort of approach to make sure that they've got that help around them.
And you mentioned foot care.
Yes.
In terms of products, what are some things that people should be looking out for when they're shopping for shoes or online or in store? What are the features that you would recommend when shopping?
Yeah, shoes is incredibly important for diabetic patients. And the reason being, I kind of like to almost put shoes and inner soles into two categories. Like sometimes I say, well, you've got functional and then you've got accommodative. So when I say functional, I'm talking about things that change the position of the foot, such as orthotics and they're things, you know, changing the mechanics of the foot. But what we're actually trying to do with a diabetic patient is we're trying to accommodate their foot. So if they have an ulcer that we're trying to offload, we're accommodating and working around that. We're not trying to reposition them and change all their mechanics. And so when you look at footwear and inner soles and so forth, you're trying to find, we're really looking for what is comfortable and soft and accommodative of their foot shape. So we don't want anything really restrictive. Can I show you this shoe here, Ash?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yep. So this anodyne range here, the great thing about them is that these are actually designed with diabetic patients in mind. So we're looking for things like a really deep toe box. And I know that seems just like a really simple thing to consider, but if you've got a shallow or too narrow toe box and you're squishing the toes together, then you can be causing some rubbing. A little bit of rubbing leads to some callus or a corn. That corn starts to ulcerate, and before you know it, you've got big problems. So we're looking for lots of depth. We're looking for really soft sorts of uppers. So you can see here that we've got not stiff, hard leathers. We've actually got really soft, stretchy fabrics, so that if there is a deformity on that person's, the top of their toe, they might have like a little hammer toe or something, that we're accommodating it, and we're not trying to, it's not going to be too restrictive or too tight. And similarly, Ash, and I'm going on a bit here, but there's so many great features that, diabetics can look out for. The lining of a shoe, as close to seam-free as we can be, is incredible because, again, a small seam, whether it be the socks or inside a shoe, can cause friction, which can cause some rubbing, can potentially cause a little bit of callus, bit of a cut. That diabetic person might be a bit compromised down there. They can't feel it.
Right.
And before you know it, you're dealing with a diabetic ulcer.
Right.
So really what the main thing, I guess, to keep in mind there is we're looking for shoes that will accommodate the foot.
Wow. And so what about, so they were best features. What are some things that, don't buy these in a shoe? What are some features that you would recommend people avoiding?
Avoid shoes that are far too narrow or far too shallow. Avoid really stiff shoes. And really another thing probably to avoid as well is your outsole. Avoid anything that's too slippery or too thin. I know things like, it's really popular to wear your nice R.M. Williams boots and things like that with a nice, smooth, shiny outsole, but they can be particularly problematic for diabetics because slippery, not a grippy outsole can lead to slips, falls, things like that. So really we're looking for all those features that are going to accommodate that foot for them.
Wow.
And if you're looking for those features, the Anodyne range from the Comfort Co, they all have that built in. So it's extra depth, it's nearly seamless, it's adjustable, it's everything that someone could be looking for in a diabetic shoe.
Oh, and may I point out one other thing with the Anodyne range as well? If you as a diabetic patient are working with a podiatrist, and sometimes that patient will have an accommodative inner sole. So that means like one that has certain cutouts and certain, it's customized to their foot. So they might have some deformities and it's sort of shaped around that. Well, what you can do with any of these shoes, your Anodynes and other ranges as well, is you can actually remove the inner sole and replace it with your custom one so that we're making sure that there are no pressure spots.
Yeah, that's extra help with that extra depth as well.
100%.
Means that, you can get it involved.
Definitely.
I was just wondering as well, so when someone goes and gets your diagnosis, it's obviously a really bad day for them, they've got diabetes, whatever it might be. The getting referred to a podiatrist, is that something that happens automatically, or is that something that someone would have to go and take upon themselves to make sure that they don't have any of those issues?
If the GP saw it fit that, their foot health was compromised, they would definitely refer them. There's quite a number of plans out there that doctors can get diabetic patients on to make sure that they're partnering with a podiatrist that can help manage their foot care. It's obviously more important for those ones that have progressed a little more so down the line. However, if it's a really early diagnosis, it's still great from an education perspective. So you might not have any peripheral neuropathy yet. You might not have any numbness, no signs or symptoms down there at the feet, but it's still worth being educated so that they know, what to manage and what to look out for.
Prevention's always better than a cure, right?
100%, yeah.
And it sounds like that's, once you've been diagnosed, there's no reversing it. Is that possible, or is it all about once you've been diagnosed, now the next thing is prevention to slow it as much as possible?
There's a lot of controversy around this subject, and a lot of people do actually believe that diabetes can be reversed through the change in dietary intake and exercise. So not for everyone, but for some people, there are a group of people out there that can make those sort of modifications and change their blood sugar levels and get them back to what is considered a normal level and no longer put them in that diabetic category anymore.
I'm assuming that's someone that has has just been diagnosed and a less further down the line in their diabetic
more
journey.
So, yes. Yeah. Right. You'd have you'd be a lot more likely to achieve those sorts of results with someone that only has to make a few changes than someone that is really sort of, there's already been a lot of damage done.
Sure.
Yeah.
So let's talk about prevention. Once you've been diagnosed, what are some other things that they can do, whether it's products or what are some things they should be looking out for that, okay, I've, just been diagnosed with diabetes. They don't know what to do. They didn't even know that foot care came into it. So why should they take care of their feet once they've been diagnosed?
Yep, a really good one. The first thing that comes to mind for me is creams. So using creams on your feet like daily. And the reason with that is because we want to maintain really, really good skin integrity. If we have callus and, build up of dry skin, cracks in the heels, Ash, like heaps of people have that. But it's a lot more problematic for a diabetic. So you might say, yeah, I've got some cracks in my heels, like no problems for me. But for a diabetic patient, that can become quite a problem. So the podiatrist would generally work with them and say, here's your routine, here's your daily regime. You're going to rub this cream into your heels each night and under the balls of your feet. Make sure we're using the correct formulas and so forth. So cream is definitely one of the top ones that I would be recommending.
Wow. So for any of our listeners that are going on, it sounds like catching it early and doing these preventative measures is really important as far as treatment goes. What kind of symptoms should people be looking out for to get tested if they have diabetes or not?
Yeah, there's a number of symptoms that, if you go and Google this sort of thing, you'll get, everything from because we're talking about high blood sugar levels, so increased thirst, increased urination, things like that on our metabolic system. But from, the foot perspective of things, then we're more so looking at these neurological and circulatory changes. So someone might have, swelling of the lower legs. They might have delayed healing, redness. They could get a cut and realise that really doesn't heal like perhaps it used to. They might be losing some sensation in their toes, a bit of numbness, tingling, all those sorts of things.
Do you ever get the diabetes diagnosis from feet?
Yeah,
So
100%. Yeah, you would definitely do. Yep. So oftentimes people might come through for a general palliative appointment. So we're talking about just they might come through and see their podiatrist every 6 or 8 weeks to have their nails cared for and so forth. And oftentimes podiatrists, just as their duty of care, they'll still check for sensation. We have a little monofilament tool, and we're checking is a person's ability to sense that still intact. And there's a few little tests that we do, and if in fact they're not passing some of those tests, it might just be a little red flag there. We might be sending them off to the GP perhaps because, it often can get picked up at the podiatrist before the GP. Yep.
Wow. Have you ever diagnosed anyone?
Oh, I've had plenty of them come through and I've sent plenty off for, second opinions and checks of things.
You probably couldn't.
Maybe I've got them too early.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. What about exercise? So you talked about, the importance of circulation and, walking is a big thing. Is there such a thing for diabetics as too much exercise? So if what we want to do is take care of the foot, make sure that, the skin is moist and, we're taking care of that surface area, for someone that may be running marathons and trying, they've been diagnosed with diabetes, they want to make a major life change and they want to get super healthy and they, sign up for a marathon. Is that too much? Is it more everything in moderation?
It is a bit more everything in moderation. You've got to make those small steps before you can take the big leaps. So generally, if you're working closely with your GP, they might send you off to a diabetes educator. That would give you a really nice guidelines as to these are next steps. And if you want to get to that marathon over there, we can work towards it, but you just got to start off with baby steps. So what are the dietary changes we need to make? Do we need to be on medication from the get-go? How are we going to manage these blood sugar levels? It's a huge space in itself just around diabetes education.
Yeah, and it sounds very holistic. In theory, everything is if you want to tackle it the right way when it comes to your health. But diabetes, when you talk about medication, your nutrition, your exercise, it sounds like a very holistic approach.
Yeah, it is. And it often takes, people will end up with a nutritionist. So they're getting dietary plans. They'll end up with their podiatrist. They might have a neurologist that they visit as well. So as well as their GP who generally will guide their plan, but it sort of takes an entire team of people to sort of work around them to make sure that management is how it should be.
Yeah.
Just wondering as well. So a lot of this chat you're changing your diet, changing your exercise, things like that, would be very specific for type 2 diabetes. What about type 1 diabetes?
Yeah, definitely. We're talking much more so type 2 diabetes here today. So this is like your late onset diabetes, which is very much, that onset hasn't come about just overnight. That's been years and years and years sort of in the making. And that's, mostly been through diet and lifestyle that has initiated it. So the diabetics that, podiatrists would see in the clinic rooms, they're, 95% of those are your type 2 diabetics.
But can it affect type 1 as well?
Oh, yes, it definitely can. Yeah, you can have type 1 diabetics will have the same symptomologies, the same presentation and everything as well as your type 2 diabetics. And without sort of, putting everyone in the same group and stereotyping too much, the type 1 diabetics, because they tend to, their diagnosis has often been picked up in adolescence and childhood and so forth. A lot of those type 1 diabetics are very well informed as to their condition. It's not a surprise to them. They've managed this their entire life. Whereas a lot of the type 2 diabetics can be a little more surprised by the diagnosis that comes along a lot later in life, and perhaps was something they never thought would affect them.
And it's more of a life change at that point. You're more going, oh damn, I need to look at how I'm living my life in all these ways. Whereas the type 1 diabetic is, they're used to it. They understand the foot cream. They understand the nutrition. All of the things that it takes.
Yeah.
So someone, say, hypothetical, I've just been diagnosed. Where would I go for my information? Do I rely on my doctor for that, or is there any sources out there which I can look at myself?
Yeah, your doctor primarily, because they're going to guide you to which other allied health professionals you need to see. And then Diabetes Australia, because they've got stacks of information, support groups, all that kind of stuff online as well, so that you should feel part of a community. If I'm going to make these changes, there's tons and tons of other people out there doing the exact same thing as you. So the better educated that you are, the more you know and understand what foods are going to benefit you and what lifestyle changes are going to benefit you, then, the better long-term prognosis you're going to have with managing your diabetes.
I suppose too, to go back to what you said at the very beginning, with 1 in 20 people having been diagnosed, that's just that have been diagnosed. How many people, when we talk about how common this is and that there's a whole community of people out there, how many more people are living with diabetes that aren't aware, that aren't taking care of themselves, that aren't doing those preventative measures?
Potentially tens of thousands,
Wow.
Maybe hundreds of thousands, I don't know, but there could be so many people out there, Ash, you're exactly right, that aren't diagnosed or perhaps that don't want to get a diagnosis or are too afraid to, or, don't really want to speak up about it. But yeah, a lot of people probably as well just wouldn't even think to, have those sorts of things checked, that if they can't feel something at the very end of their toe, they're not going to know they can't feel it, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
So unless they've sort of got a podiatrist doing some in-room testing or a doctor taking some bloods and so forth, they might not know at all.
And we talk about it being, manageable a lot of the time. There's so many things that you can do if you've got diabetes, but the seriousness of what it is actually quite intense when we talk about it being a precursor to a lot of other health problems. And, talk a little bit about that in terms of the seriousness that I think a lot of the time when we talk about diabetes as a society, it's very in passing, like, so many people have diabetes, and because it's common, we're less likely to take the seriousness of it, to heart. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. We do sort of downplay diabetes a bit. I think in Australia we sort of, it's common and people throw it around, and, I know plenty of people sort of in their 70s and so forth who think, like it's not a big deal. And really don't take it too seriously. But I guess the gravity of it is that it does have a lot of knock-on effects. So it does, it can cause so many other afflictions and issues. So it's just incredibly important that we're managing it and that we're, aware of what we've got. And like I was saying before, Ash, it's someone with diabetes might think, oh, it's all right, I'm just going to take my insulin and, away we go, I'll be fine.
Yeah.
But if you don't go and then do something like check the foot, I don't know, I keep coming back to that because it's just the simplest thing to say. But if you don't go and check the bottom of your foot and you've got that cut, then before you know it, as you mentioned before, you've got, you're losing part of your toe. And once someone has an amputation of some sort, so that might just be the big toe initially, they're much, much more predisposed to then losing more of the foot, more of the ankle and so forth. So it is, it's something that we need to take really seriously.
I think to people that are potentially just been diagnosed, they probably see that as a very way off possibility of it's okay, I can manage it, which is great because in theory there are so many things that we can be doing, but to know that, hey, this is actually kind of very serious and that, if we don't take care of ourselves, then it could be a lot worse.
Yeah, definitely. And you can, no pun intended, but you can get on the front foot with diabetes. You can.
No.
Yeah, absolutely not. Because if you engage some of those measures yourself in the first instance, so if you make some dietary changes, you make some lifestyle changes, you're going to be in a much better position in 10 years' time than if you didn't make those changes.
Right. Yeah, and that's the cool part too, right? Like, as much as it is serious, there are so many people that do have it. So it's very common, talking about it, like you said, the community groups and the amount of professionals that we have at our disposal here in Australia that we can access at at any given moment. That's, that's wonderful assets to have to be able to prevent it long term. So
it's very true. And we're very fortunate in Australia. We have a great healthcare system that everyone can access. So those sorts of conditions, such as diabetes, they have, endless resources and accessibility to, an array of health professionals and everyone that they're going to need. So if someone does have a concern or perhaps thinks, maybe I should go and get that checked out, then don't hold off because you can access all these resources. We have Medicare in Australia. We're very, very fortunate. So they should go and seek out that guidance.
Yeah, and if you live in Brisbane, Sophie's a podiatrist. And if you're looking and you have any sort of questions, go see your GP, like Sophie mentioned, and then go see a podiatrist if needed. But it was so lovely talking to you today and learning more about the importance of diabetes and foot care. And thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you for listening to the Comfort Walk and Talk. If this episode has stepped up your foot care game, we'd love your support with a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
And don't forget to subscribe on your favourite platform so you never miss a step on your journey to comfort.
And for more insights, follow us at our social channels at the Comfort Walk and Talk. Walk comfortably until we meet again.